Frayed Relations. This opinion explains how U.S.-India strategic ties rapidly unraveled and why it matters. If one day is a long time in politics, so it is in diplomacy. This opening sentence serves as a thesis statement by asserting that diplomatic relationships can change very quickly. The most striking example of this is the extraordinary speed with which the special relationship between the U.S. and India has been unraveling. Special relationship is jargon, which means a close, formal, diplomatic partnership between two countries. This sentence means the close U.S.-India partnership is breaking down very fast. In February, the familiar warmth of what Narendra Modi described as a mega partnership was on display during his visit to the White House. On display is prepositional phrase, which means shown publicly. This sentence means the warmth between leaders was visible during Modi's White House visit. The Indian Prime Minister was the second world leader President Donald Trump hosted after his return to power. Return to power is noun phrase which means coming back into political office. This sentence means Modi was among the first foreign guests after Trump regained the presidency. Both effusively praised each other, and Trump talked about his special bond with Modi. Special bond is idiomatic expression which means a close personal or political relationship described in everyday speech. This sentence means both leaders publicly expressed mutual warmth. Nevertheless, there were signs during the visit of the friction that lay ahead. Friction that lay ahead is metaphor, which means future tensions imagined as physical rubbing or resistance. This sentence means there were early hints that tensions would follow the visit. Amid the hugs and handshakes, Trump criticized India for having some of the highest trade tariffs in the world. Hugs and handshakes is idiomatic expression, which means public gestures of friendliness. This sentence means friendly gestures took place even as Trump attacked India's tariff policies. Hours before Modi's visit, Trump announced reciprocal tariffs to match those levied by other countries on U.S. goods. Reciprocal tariffs is jargon, which means matching duties applied in response to another country's tariffs. This sentence means Trump planned mirror tariffs against countries that taxed U.S. exports. He also said India was a hard place to do business in. Hard place to do business in is idiomatic expression, which means a difficult environment for foreign firms. This sentence means Trump described India's market as unfriendly to outsiders. During the election campaign, he accused India of being a very big abuser of trade and made it plain that acting on tariffs would be his top priority. Top priority is jargon, which means the most important objective. This sentence means tariffs were a central focus of Trump's policy agenda. These signs of impending trouble were either ignored or underestimated by New Delhi. Underestimated is verb, which means judged to be less serious than they actually were. This sentence means India did not fully recognize how serious the looming dispute would be. Several rounds of trade negotiations that followed were marked by sharp differences, especially over U.S. access to India's highly protected agricultural and dairy sector. Highly protected is adjective, which means strongly shielded from foreign competition by policy. This sentence means talks broke down over market access to sensitive farm and dairy sectors. But the Indian side still expected to reach a deal with its biggest trading partner. Biggest trading partner is noun phrase, which means the country with the largest bilateral trade volume. This sentence means India hoped to secure an agreement with its main trade partner. Instead, Trump unleashed a barrage of threats and invectives against India, castigating it for its obnoxious trade practices. Barrage of threats is metaphor, which means a heavy, sustained outpouring likened to artillery fire. This sentence means Trump launched a torrent of hostile statements and threats. In social media posts on X, he assailed India, often in harsh language. Assailed is verb, which means attacked verbally. This sentence means Trump repeatedly attacked India online with sharp words. Then, just ahead of his august first deadline to conclude trade deals on reciprocal tariffs, he announced imposition of a 25% levy on Indian imports and an unspecified penalty for India's purchase of Russian oil and arms. Levy is jargon, which means a tax or duty charged on goods. This sentence means Trump imposed a 25% tariff and threatened further penalties tied to Russian purchases. He also ruled out further talks until the tariff dispute was resolved. Ruled out is phrasal verb, which means refuse to consider or allow something. Where this sentence means Trump refused to resume negotiations until tariffs were settled. This left the Modi government reeling in shock from the additional tariffs decision, which it described as unwarranted. Reeling in shock is idiomatic expression, which means stunned and struggling to respond. This sentence means India reacted with surprise and condemned the tariffs as unjustified. Trump also threatened additional penalties on India for being part of BRICS, which he characterizes as being anti-America. BRICS is jargon, which means the grouping Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. This sentence means Trump warned of punishments and framed BRICS as hostile to U.S. interests. Trump then dubbed India, along with Russia, as dead economies. Dead economies is metaphor, which means economies described as lifeless or stagnant. This sentence means Trump insulted both countries by calling their economies moribund. Claiming India's oil imports from Russia were fueling the Ukraine war, and with trade talks deadlocked, he imposed additional 25 PC tariffs as penalty, ratcheting them to 50 PC. Deadlocked is adjective, which means at an impasse with no agreement. This sentence means talks were frozen, and Trump raised tariffs further to 50%. India is the second largest importer of oil from Russia after China. Second largest importer is noun phrase, which means ranked number 2 by volume of imports. This sentence gives context on India's reliance on Russian oil. Over a third of India's crude oil imports come from Russia. Crude oil imports is jargon, which means raw petroleum bought from abroad. This sentence quantifies Russia's share of India's oil supply. Trump's coercive tariff actions have left India in a quandary. Quandary is noun, which means a difficult situation with no easy solution. This sentence means Trump's measures put India in a politically awkward dilemma. Within less than 6 months, the strategic partnership between the two countries had plunged into a serious crisis that was driving it towards a meltdown. Plunged into is phrasal verb, which means fallen suddenly and deeply into a bad state. Meltdown is a metaphor, which means a collapse or breakdown. This sentence means the strategic relationship rapidly descended into deep crisis. How did things come to this pass? Come to this pass is idiomatic expression, which means reach this unfortunate or critical point. This sentence asks how events reached such a damaging stage. There has been much discussion in the international media and think tank community, with analysts raising the question of whether this is a temporary blip or a fundamental reordering of the relationship. Think tank is jargon, which means an organization that researches and advises on policy. Blip is idiomatic expression, which means a brief, temporary disturbance. This sentence means experts debate whether the rupture is short-lived or structural. Most of the analysis comes down on the side of the latter, given the structural sources of their differences in a shifting geopolitical environment. Geopolitical environment is jargon, which means the global strategic context shaping states' interests. This sentence means many analysts expect a long-term realignment because of deep strategic causes. New Delhi seems to have made 3 major miscalculations and misjudgments, which framed its policy and led to mishandling of the situation. Miscalculations is noun, which means strategic errors in judgment. This sentence means India made key errors that worsened the crisis. 1. It failed to see that Trump's overwhelming priority was trade and not strategic issues, such as India's role in America's containment of China, which New Delhi thought would shield it from divergences on tariffs. Containment of China is jargon, which means policies designed to limit China's regional influence. This sentence means India wrongly assumed strategic ties would protect it from trade conflict. India's hubris about its strategic importance for Washington, nurtured over the decades, blindsided Indian officials to the fallout of the tariff discord on the relationship. Hubris is noun, which means excessive pride or overconfidence. This sentence means overconfidence prevented India from anticipating the damaging consequences. They also failed to recognize Trump's use of tariffs as a tool in pursuit of geopolitical interests. Tool is metaphor, which means an instrument deliberately used to achieve policy aims. This sentence means tariffs were being used as an instrument of foreign policy. The second miscalculation relates to the India-Pakistan crisis in May, and Trump's repeated declarations he brought that conflict to an end. Declarations is noun, which means public statements or claims. This sentence introduces India's second error about denying U.S. mediation credit. New Delhi vehemently denied the U.S. played a role, which contradicted both Trump and reality, and was to prove consequential for relations with Washington. Vehemently is adverb, which means with strong intensity. Consequential is adjective, which means having significant effects. This sentence means India's emphatic denial angered Washington and had diplomatic consequences. The fact that Trump mentioned his role at least 24 times was a part of his effort to burnish his credentials as a peacemaker. Burnish is verb, which means to enhance or polish one's reputation. Peacemaker is jargon, which means someone who brokers or claims credit for ending conflict. This sentence means Trump repeatedly claimed credit to bolster his image as mediator. Modi himself declared, no country had mediated in the ceasefire. Ceasefire is jargon, which means a temporary halt to fighting. This sentence means Modi publicly denied any external mediation in the truce. By repudiating Trump, New Delhi antagonized the U.S. president, injured his ego, and hardened his position when he was already railing against India's trade policies and Russian links. Repudiating is verb, which means rejecting or disowning someone's claim. Railing against is phrasal verb, which means loudly criticizing. This sentence means India's rejection offended Trump and increased his hostility. It was also gratuitous, as acknowledging that role would not have cost New Delhi much. Gratuitous is adjective, which means unnecessary or unwarranted. This sentence means India's denial was needless, because admission would have had little downside. It could still have reiterated its traditional opposition to any U.S. mediation on Kashmir. Reiterated is verb, which means restated or repeated. Mediation is jargon, which means third-party intervention to resolve disputes. This sentence means India could have accepted credit while still opposing outside mediation on Kashmir. The sudden warmth in U.S.-Pakistan relations also angered New Delhi, making it more obdurate in giving Trump credit for diffusing the crisis. Sudden warmth is idiomatic expression, which means unexpected friendliness. Obdurate is adjective, which means stubbornly resistant. This sentence means closer U.S.-Pakistan ties made India less willing to praise Trump's role. 3. New Delhi failed to read the geopolitical calculations of a man who was upending just about every aspect of American foreign policy, unencumbered by past dynamics. Upending is verb, which means overturning or radically changing. Unencumbered is adjective, which means free from previous constraints. This sentence means India did not foresee how drastically Trump would reshape U.S. foreign policy. For Trump, India's value as a counterweight to China didn't seem to count for much, especially as his transactional approach was focused on striking a grand bargain with China and not seeking endless confrontation. Counterweight is metaphor, which means a balancing force used to offset another power. Transactional approach is jargon, which means deal-based, short-term diplomacy. This sentence means Trump prioritized deal-making over long-term balancing via India. As Ed Luce put it in the Financial Times, Trump is undoing quarter-of-century of U.S. policy of shoring up India as a counterbalance to China. Shoring up is phrasal verb, which means supporting or strengthening. Counterbalance is metaphor, which means an opposing force that offsets another. This sentence quotes a commentator saying Trump is reversing long-term U.S. support for India. On Russia, the Indian government did not foresee that, frustrated by President Vladimir Putin on a Ukraine ceasefire, the mercurial U.S. president would flip and shift his stance, as well as harden his position on countries that traded with it. Mercurial is adjective, which means unpredictable in temperament. Flip is verb, which means suddenly change position. This sentence means India did not expect sudden shifts in U.S. policy on Russia. New Delhi's old think proved an obstacle in understanding geopolitical changes, much less managing them. Old think is jargon, which means outdated strategic assumptions. Obstacle is noun, which means a barrier. This sentence means dated thinking prevented India from adapting to new realities. This has left New Delhi in a bind and scrambling for a strategy to deal with Trump, who has little tolerance for India's avowed strategic autonomy. In a bind is idiomatic expression, which means in a difficult situation with few good options. Strategic autonomy is jargon, which means the ability to act independently in foreign policy. This sentence means India is struggling to craft a response, while Trump dislikes its independence. It condemned the latest U.S. move as unfair, unjustified, and unreasonable. Condemned is verb, which means publicly denounce strongly. This sentence means India formally criticized the U.S. measures. So far, the Modi government has responded by expressions of nationalist rhetoric, pushing back against the U.S. by continuing to buy oil from Russia, saying it won't compromise on farmers' interests, and stepping up engagement with China. Nationalist rhetoric is jargon, which means patriotic messaging used to rally domestic support. Pushing back is phrasal verb, which means resisting or opposing pressure. This sentence lists India's political and strategic responses. India's dilemma is that if it concedes on tariffs, it loses face at home and hands an advantage to the opposition that sees Trump's actions as economic blackmail. Loses face is idiomatic expression, which means suffer public embarrassment or loss of prestige. Economic blackmail is jargon, which means coercive economic pressure used for political ends. This sentence means yielding would be domestically humiliating and politically costly. If it doesn't, it risks lasting damage both to its economy and relations with Washington. Lasting damage is metaphor, which means long-term harmful consequences. This sentence means refusal could produce prolonged harm to India's economy and diplomatic ties. The U.S.-India strategic alignment faces an uncertain and troubled future, for now. Strategic alignment is jargon, which means coordinated long-term partnership of policy and interests. This sentence means the future of the partnership is currently unstable and unclear. The writer is a former ambassador to the U.S., UK, and UN, published in Dawn, August 11, 2025.